Hello, and welcome back to Extra Literary Affairs, a podcast for the lit curious reader because why not read a little bit of everything? I'm Jennifer Smith,
And I'm Joey Kelly.
and today we are going to have yet another affair with Allie Smith and her novel Winter. So, Joey, it has been a while since we have been in the studio together. We took a nice long Christmas break. It sprung into 2026, and we are both on the East Coast of the United States, and we are experiencing winter weather times 10. So I thought it was very fitting to think about reading this novel and reflecting on our holiday in our conversation. So I would like to acknowledge something that we had talked about in the fall when we read Allie Smith Autumn. We both were so charmed with that novel. So I was so psyched going into the audiobook version of Winter and was completely charmed. What was your experience reading that book in real time? Do you have the book handy?
Okay, so here's the book. I like the American covers better than the British covers. I just don't like the British covers. And usually I like the British ones better. This is the American one. Even though this painting is titled Autumn and not Winter, so that's fun. I guess it just looked winter enough, but it's actually a painting of autumn. It still gives a winter vibe, so I guess that's all that mattered. But anyway, you asked me my impression of this. So I figured out now that we've read two of the four in this quartet of these novels that I need to read these twice because the first time feels very exploratory when I'm reading it. I'm getting to know the characters and the themes and the tone of this story. And then I kind of walk away a little bit confused, or at least I have so far. And then I have to go back and start to analyze. Now that I have my bearings and I understand the characters and everything a little bit better, I can go in and be like, well, I had questions about this and I had questions about this. I didn't get this. So then I can pay attention to everything and start to figure out what is my opinion on this novel. What do I think Allie Smith was trying to do and go from there? Because there are some things that I still don't really know the answer to, like the floating head / landscape / coastline. No idea. I mean, I have a theory as to what she was doing there, but I don't actually know. And I haven't really seen a lot of interviews for this book that when she wrote it, so maybe she did explain it somewhere, but I guess it doesn't really matter because authorial intent sometimes does not even matter. What I love so far about this quartet is that each of them really invite the reader to contemplate and sit with the content and think, what is going on here? Why is she doing these things? There's something she does that's really interesting that I'm not really going to plan on talking about unless we really want to. She has a whole conversation between Arthur and Lux when they're at the train station to go to Sophia's. It's one-sided. We start with Arthur and we get no responses from Lux. He is just asking questions and responding. And then after that is done, then we get Lux's whole part of the conversation that was missing. And it's like, this is so fascinating. Why would you do that? But I loved it. I read it the first time. I was like, I don't know if I love this as much as Autumn. And then I read it the second time. I was like, no, of course I love it as much as Autumn. What did you think, though?
Yeah, Joey. So I appreciate that you brought out the revisiting of the previous material to kind of tee yourself up to enjoy this novel because you had given me the feedback like, Jennifer, I read Winter and it was not the same experience I had reading Autumn. And I was like, with my stellar memory, I better go back and check and get reacquainted with Autumn. So I listened to that as an audiobook and fell in love with those characters, fell in love with Daniel, all the emotions, everything was stirred right up. And I was so immersed in the world. Allie Smith, I believe that her writing isn't for everyone. There's a very artistic way in which she speaks. She makes a lot of these little side gestures to other pieces of literature and art and pop culture and historical precedent. She's all over the place in the best possible way of saying that. That's just very vibrant. And so when I picked up Winter, I was like, oh yeah. So I have listened to that, Joey, twice in preparation of this conversation. And I can say that when I sat down to make my notes for things that we might choose to discuss, I really got so much out of it. She wove this beautiful tapestry across two novels so far. Things keep popping up, characters keep popping up. We see things from a different person's perspective. I found out something I did not know, Joey, which I just can't wait to tell you right now that just popped into my head. Back when we were reading Autumn, I believed in my heart of hearts when Daniel said he only loved one person in his life. That way.
Mhm.
He was very vague as I thought he meant Pauline Bodie.
Yeah, that's
But
what I
now
thought.
we have this story where he actually meets Sophia, one of the main characters of this
My god.
novel. He
Why did I
has
not
a relationship with her, Joey. She says it from her side. It's this reflecting back and forth. And then we find out, like, the cliffhanger that, which I'm going to just lay it out right now. He is the biological father of Arthur,
Yeah.
Art. Ellie Smith, like, you're my friend. I get who you are. But that was clever. Of course, I am in love with a man who I'm only going to see for one day, separated by 8 years. They didn't do anything. They were just enamored
Yeah.
with each other. They both lost each other's phone number. One fell out of his pocket. She got her purse stolen in the world before the internet and Find My Friend and Find My Phone and LinkedIn. Somebody can just disappear from your life. So they bump into each other. They reunite after 8 years. He's like, oh my God, it's you. So immediately they get together. They consummate their relationship like
Yeah.
that minute. That was a
Yeah,
very
yeah.
fun thing. The way in which they experience the world together, she's like, it's beyond words. And she used a bunch of colloquial words for sexual intercourse, which are just really charming in the British. Like, we didn't shag, we didn't do a lot of these things, but we did something that transcends language. More of that, please. Thank you so much. And she gets pregnant, unbeknownst to us at the time. They go to Paris, and she's like, yeah, you're a little too free spirited for me. I know you're really awesome, but I can't manage. And she leaves him and he's gone and he never knows he has this child. Are you kidding me? Thank you, Allie Smith, for explaining Daniel to us in the previous novel and his love for that young girl who Elizabeth, who was kind of like his sister, kind of like a kid. It was never sexual, it was never romantic, but it was very loving. So to see that play out with Art was really great. So Joey, I was completely charmed, but the more I thought about how if we were doing a flow chart or a mind map, I was like, wow, she plotted all of these things out. She makes these little nods to you. You see her, you like feel her as a writer going, wink, wink, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know, you know. And if you don't know, it still doesn't ruin anything, right?
Well, I can attest that because for some weird reason, I did not realize that Danny is Daniel from Autumn. I had no idea. Until you just said that, I had no idea that was who that was. Maybe because she only refers to him as Danny, and of course, we only know him really as Daniel. That's obviously the nickname for Daniel is Dan or Danny. For some reason, it went completely over my head, and I did not draw that, but that makes me love it even more that we get that backstory. And oh my God, now this is even more tragic because
Yes,
Daniel would have
it
been a
is
great
more tragic.
dad.
He was the perfect dad. In both of the novels that we've read, we talk a lot about distances. We talk about people who are absent. Elizabeth in Autumn did not have a relationship with her father, and her mom kind of kept him a big mystery. We now have in this story Daniel's child, which she never ever knew about. She married somebody right away, and she's like, oh, look, we have a kid now. This is so great. And the man she married, and you taught me this term,
That was a lavender marriage, yeah.
they both benefited from the appearance of having a stable, heteronormative family structure when neither one of them were into it. And somebody had asked in this story, it's like, well, did you ever sleep with Ray? And she's like, no.
God,
Why would I do that? That is like, why would you
yeah.
ask such a ridiculous question? And there's just so much in this story that was so touching about communication. The only reason that it occurred to me was Sophia is a name that has a special meaning to me. So when I see somebody with that name, I kind of tick that in my little memory box. She was describing a painting that mimicked the postcard that Daniel had sent her, and he never saw that again. They picked up in Paris, and he was like, man, I really wish I would have kept that because that's for me. And now looking backwards at the storyline, I was like, well, you left something a little bit more important than a postcard with this lady when you were in Paris. And that was just a really brilliant thing. You opened up this conversation asking about the way it is written. There's a whole section where you're hearing a conversation between Art and Lux. You think you kind of know what's going on. Okay, normal conversation. And then the very next section, it's all Lux answering questions that you already sort of heard about before, but I was like, how interesting. Why would you do that? What was the point of that? When you asked that question, I hadn't really thought about it before, was the difficulty of sometimes truly seeing somebody else's perspective. Do you really understand what I am saying? What happens if your voice is erased and it is only me recounting what my answers were without questions? Again, love this author. I'm really curious to see What else was on your mind about this particular work?
I mean, so many things. Now I'm sitting here thinking about, oh my God, that was Daniel. That was Daniel this whole time. And now I have to read it for a third time because now I have this richer experience. And I wish I can give it more than 5 stars now because it makes it that much better. And I hope Daniel's in the next one because he's my favorite.
Joey, we're going to give it 5 stars every time we read it. So I'm up to 15 stars already.
Yeah.
Like this is 15 out of 5 stars. It is so good. And I will say, it is something that I feel every time I read the story, we know what's going to happen. We know the plot. We sort of figure out what's going on here or enough of it. It just feels like a much more richer, nuanced, this winking back to the intellect of the reader. She
Mm.
talks about so many themes, Joy. I'd love to just talk about the themes that keep permeating through her works. They talk about Brexit. They talk about populism. They talk about President Trump. They talk about the value of money. They talk about, is society better because we have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, instant find my friend, find my phone? Does that perpetuate togetherness, closeness, community, or is this really an isolating thing? It's all in there. Family estrangement. And what do you do when somebody that you love has the exact opposite idea about how the world works? Is there any reconciliation? Can love conquer those big, deep political divides? And I know some people listening to us are like, oh, we just do not want to read another political thing. It's not political like that. I don't even know how else to say that. She talks a lot about things historically that happened in the UK that were divisive in her family. Eventually, she came to terms with the fact that you don't have to agree on every detail to still agree that that was a worthwhile relationship.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of topics and themes in here that are not repetitive in a bad way, but clearly these are things that Allie Smith wants to discuss. And one of those bigger themes in this one for me was the discussion about immigration in the UK and obviously worldwide and especially the United States, where you're like, wow, this is depressing because literally nothing ever changes and that sucks for the world and progress. But I think you can see how clever Allie Smith really is because she names Sophia's sister Iris, which is a part of your eye. So we kind of get the sense that like Iris is really the one with the most clarity. I would probably say that Lux is actually the clearest.
Yeah, thank you for calling Ellie Smith out with those clever namings because we have Art, Arthur. He's this really interesting character, and there's so many nuances to his name. Then we get Iris, as you said, it is a mechanism of your eye, the actual physical thing that allows us to see. It's part of that complex system. But when I hear Iris, I think of a Siberian iris, which is this beautiful purple flower, which is my
Mm,
favorite flower. And she was a flower child in some way in the UK.
yeah.
Arthur remembers having these dreams of being attacked by these big flower people. There's just this interweaving of this beautiful nature can be scary, it can be beautiful, it can be transformative. His aunt and others stormed the gates of this Air Force base in the UK to protest nuclear annihilation opportunities, right? They're like, we're against the bomb. The soldiers said, "Well, it was this big group of women and they looked like goddesses with their flowers and their crowns." I just loved that idea of using feminine power, beauty, the moral stance of are going to put our lives on the line because what is happening does not work for us. And we really want that to be known. I just thought was really beautiful. So Joy, back onto that tangent. Yes, her names bop you right on the nose. She's just really quite something.
If you're gonna read it closely, then you can pick up some of these things. But I think the dynamic between Sophia and Iris is obviously a main focus of this book. There's only really 4 characters that we really get to hear from that much, except for Daniel sometimes. Iris goes off and is protesting nuclear warfare and is literally chaining herself to this military base and is doing it for years. She's gone off to Greece to help with refugees in the real time of the novel. Sophia goes off and has a more capitalistic pursuit where she opens up her own business. She hikes prices up quite a bit for a huge profit margin. So I guess don't hate the player, hate the game. And we don't really get to know their mother at all. At least I can't recall getting any information. We do get to know their father a little bit tangentially through their memories of him. He served in World War II and he was very not mindful, it's not the right word. He was very skeptical of anyone he deemed foreign, even within Europe itself. Obviously, there was some negative sentiments about Germans at the time during World War II for obvious reasons. And it didn't seem to end there. It seemed to be like anyone that was not English or British, that was someone he would not necessarily trust. And then he went into the financial world after, and it was sort of implied that this now is applied to Jewish people as well for obvious stereotype reasons that would be in there. So it seems like Iris goes off and she becomes this sort of flower child of the time. And Sophia becomes very conservative in her views. And I saw her as a really kind of xenophobic character because of her father's views, who ends up going to New Zealand. I mean, the Brits went there, but you would think you want to stay in Britain, but they never make any sense anyway. But the interaction between her and Lux, where she refuses to call Lux her name. Well, we didn't tell the whole summary of the book here, but okay.
We did
I
not.
have a summary that I wrote that I will read to see if I got it right because it's hard to describe
Please.
this book. But anyway, before I do that, Luck goes in with the name Charlotte, and I'll explain that in just a second. But when she says, like, hey, I'm actually not Charlotte, my name is actually Luck, so please call me that. And she refuses to. And she says, I can tell you're not English, but you're English to me. And she refuses to move from that point. And there could be two reasons. She could be like, I want you to feel welcome. You're an immigrant to this country. Lux is originally from Croatia, and then her family moves while she's very young to Canada. And so she's immigrating from Canada now. So she might want to say, you're here, you're a British citizen now. Well, that's not true. She's not a British citizen, but she's living in Britain at the time, or England. And so maybe she wants to have this very welcoming thing. Like, you want to have this British identity, and so I acknowledge that, and now you can have that. Or she's trying to say, I can't accept you unless you are British, kind of following in her father's footsteps, which is where I landed. I don't think that she's trying to make her feel very welcome because she makes her sleep in the barn. She's like, I physically can't have you here. I can't speak to you unless I delude myself into believing that you're English. So which one do you want? Charlotte's a very British sounding name, but Lux certainly isn't. Let me try to read my summary really quick and see if I got it right here, because I probably should have started with this so that people know what we're talking about. But it's a second in the series, so you should probably just read it. So with Autumn, I read the synopsis and you were like, no, this is not enough. This doesn't tell me anything. Well, we can definitely see that there is inspiration from A Christmas Carol. It's explicitly mentioned, but I think there are a lot of nods to the Dickens story. So if you read that story, or if you watched the Muppet Christmas Carol, that's a good portrayal, actually, of the story. I mean, some things are added, obviously, because it's Muppets, but it's pretty close. So you already have some context if you go in it with that. Okay, so there's this woman named Sophia who lives alone in a huge manor house in England and has like 15 bedrooms. And for an unexplained reason, she is haunted by a floating head that cannot speak. She's not sure whether it's just her imagination or it's a medical issue. So she goes to an eye doctor to check to see if it's legit or not. And so we get another nod to A Christmas Carol because Scrooge obviously is like, you could be an undigested bit of cheese or a glob of mustard. I don't really believe that Marley is here haunting me. So we get another kind of homage to the Dickens story. This is really about relationships, literary fiction usually is, but Sophia's relationship specifically with Arthur, and then Arthur's relationship with his girlfriend, and then the stranger Lux at a bus stop randomly. And at the heart of this, Sophia's relationship with her estranged sister Iris, and Iris's relationship with bad political actors. So we're learning about how all of them fit into this story and how they interact with one another, or if they don't, because obviously there was a 30-year gap of interaction between Sophia and Iris. But really at the heart of the story, I think, is a conversation about selective empathy, immigration law, war, activism, memory, and reconciliation. And that's my summary.
I agree with so many things in that summary, Joey, but with our experience with Allie Smith and her novels, there's so much more in there as well. I made a list for myself of how many of the stylistic and thematic things were repeated in the quartet so far. We've read 2 out of 2.
Yes.
But we will get to 4. We first meet Daniel in Autumn, and he's having this out of body experience of like, wait, have I time traveled? Am I dead? Have I been reincarnated in my old body? What in the world is going on? Oh, that all makes more sense later. When she sees this disembodied little global baby head kind of floating around, I was like, okay, Allie Smith, you are helping us think, what is the life of the mind? What is that symbolizing? Is it a physical ailment? What happens? Because after her son arrives, correct me if I'm wrong, Joey, she doesn't see that little baby head anymore. That just kind of goes away. She calls it the head, right? So capital T, capital H, the head. She said, it's like a baby. Well, it wasn't like my baby because I would have been a much better mom if my son, Arthur, had been more like this disembodied little
Yeah,
head. So
silent.
peaceful, it doesn't talk. And I thought, oh, isn't that interesting, mother? Isn't that interesting? That echoing of she falls in love with Daniel in the same way that we fall in love with Daniel in the other story. One of my favorite scenes, Joey, and this probably resonated with you. They met each other after 8 years of being apart. They had like that one really interesting, intellectual, and fun Christmas Eve. 8 years prior, they meet each other, they do the deed. They're having a conversation about Kepler and stars and Halley's Comet. And he gets up from the bed, still probably naked, right? Gets up,
Yeah.
gets a book off the shelf, and sets it down. It's like, let me tell you some more things. And she's like, I know. Sounds like that would be like a really boring thing, but that was one of the best moments of her life. It was that total embodiment of what I love about the interesting people in my life. It's like they just have all of these semi random facts and figures and things they've learned through their whole life that somehow comes into play for this whole tapestry of experience that aligns with my interests. Of course, you love Daniel. He's amazing. And I think that's why, at least for myself, why I love Allie Smith. She has this wealth of information that she brings together. And like Autumn, she starts us out with a Shakespeare quote. She gives several modern quotes, and then she gives a quote from another writer that they took out of their own contemporary book. So there's just these little nods to, I don't want to say formulaic because that sounds like a really bad word in my vocabulary, but these consistencies that you're like, huh, I wonder how else Shakespeare is going to show up. And Joe, you probably know this one way better than me. Talks about cymbaling,
I actually have
right?
not read that one, but it did make me wanna
I've
read
never
it.
read that either. When she tells it out of the mouth of Lux, like, that's for us. We definitely need to read that story. So I was just very excited about that. I'll say one more thing before I pass this back to you about being welcoming. Your first interpretation, which was very generous and kind, about the mom saying, oh, I just met you as Charlotte, so I have to see you as Charlotte. She's not welcoming of immigrants because when she showed up to her house with the son, and she literally says these words, just so you know, you're not welcome here. And Charlotte slash Lux is like, that's okay. Good to know.
Yeah, yeah,
I won't be
alright,
any
well,
trouble. I'm not going to be any trouble. Wherever you want to put me. She's like, you're going to have to sleep in the barn. And Lux, as we learn, is a unhoused person. She's used to finding accommodation in places that are not standard comforts of home. So she's like, hey, no problem. I'm indoors. This is awesome. I'll just be out there. And I think it is Lux's very humane, comforting, physically present presence, if that makes sense. She's a very caretaking person that she slowly works that woman down. And I think the moment when they had their connection, where the mom said, you're welcome to do something, she's like, actually, I'm not welcome.
yeah.
And she just looked at her like, you said it. I'm just giving it back to you. And she said that there was like a little glint in the mom's eye and she almost broke a smile. So she's like, oh, I see you. You're not some dumb immigrant that doesn't understand me. You are a very wise and perceptive person who's going to kind of call me on my stuff. And I just love that whole moment of even when the son says, how do you, a person who was born in Croatia, had to leave her country because of the political instability and sort of the ripple effect through her family, even though they weren't in the war, go to Canada. He's like, how do you know more about Shakespeare, English society, all of this historical things? Like, why are you more British than me? How is this even possible? And I think the mom is also seeing you can choose to be British in some ways.
Yeah, Lux mentions, like, she worked hard to understand all of these nuance. She doesn't understand all, like, the English cliches and stuff like that, but she does know quite a bit about the society that she decides to live in. But I wanna go back to the baby head thing because that's the first time that we meet Sophia in this book, is she's seeing this head. Similar to, like, how we meet Daniel in the beginning of Autumn, where it's a dream that we're experiencing with him. We're meeting these characters at a really weird and inopportune moment, and it seems like, why would you do that, Allie Smith? Because you're not painting them in the best light. But in the case with Daniel, we need that context because we need to know that Daniel is a safe person for all the other characters to be around because he is a single man who could have malevolent intent and be nefarious, but he's not, of course. He's the exact opposite. He's the best. So what do we learn? Why is this so integral to Sophia? Because she seems very, like, logical and a very cogent person normally. She sort of addresses this very logically where she's like, "Oh, this cannot be real. And so it must be something to do with my eye. And then she goes to the eye doctor, and the doctor's like, you have the extremely good eyesight. So there's no problem with your eyes. It's crazy how old you are and how good your eyes are. And then after that is when she starts to talk to the head itself. And of course, it starts to sort of degrade. It loses its hair. She has to wrap it up. It sleeps in bed with her. It seems to gain weight, sort of like more mass. I don't think it really grows, but it starts to get heavier, and it starts to lose its facial features. And it just is this amorphous blob after a while. But I still don't know, and I hinted at this a Marley character from Charles Dickens, where there is this entity that comes and says, "You're gonna be visited by 3 ghosts." And, of course, those happen throughout the night of Christmas Eve into Christmas morning, early Christmas morning. But in this case, the clock strikes midnight repeatedly. So we're living through all of these memories with her as she's like, "Why are they doing this? Is this a joke? I can't still be midnight." So we don't really know. We're taking it at her word that the bell tower at the local church is being rung supposedly only at midnight, but we don't know for sure. We can't verify this fact. So it could be that they bring it on the hour every hour, and she is just living out the correct timeline here. Because something that Ali Smith does that's really interesting and I didn't catch at first was that she writes what's happening in the present in past tense, and whatever's happening in the past, whatever memory, she's writing in present tense. And so we get this really interesting concept of what is time? Can we trust that Sophia is aware enough that, like, this is how the stories is being told? The tense doesn't match with what part of the story we're supposed to be in, which is really interesting, and it's very subtle. And I was like, wait a minute, there's something changing here. And I had to be like, oh my goodness, she's changing tense. And that's usually like a no-no. Usually in writing, you would stick to 110s. That would be like an amateur move with air quotes here. But Ali Smith knows exactly what she's doing, and she's doing it very intentionally. So it's a really interesting little tidbit. It's so subtle, and she does it so perfectly that if you're not paying attention, you're going to miss that. My idea about the baby head is it is supposed to be like a Marley character, and the memories are the close of Christmas, past, present, and future. Even though she has more of them, it's the same vibe is what I'm getting. But I couldn't really explain how then this transfers over to Arthur, because he doesn't have a vision of a baby's head or just like a blob or a sphere. Because Arthur doesn't see it as the same thing. He says it's either a coastline or a landscape, that he can feel the physical grit and sand beneath his fingernails and in his scalp that he can pick out. He can physically see it on the table. And he's like, no one else sees this? This is crazy. It's huge. It's literally blocking out light. It's making us all green. Is this like generational trauma? As Ali Smith is showing us that this is a burden that is being passed down, because Arthur is more like his mother than he is his aunt, I would say.
Possibly. So, Joey, when he said that he could hear the grit falling on the table, if you ever shake out a beach towel in the house, you just hear that. And the sand under his fingernails, I'm like, yeah, just like when we very first met Daniel, he's like, wait, this is sand, right? He takes us to that grains of sand. So I'm like his father's child, like that whole little kind of through line. I've been talking a lot about death and dying and transitioning life and family relationships and that stuff, preparing for what we're going to talk about in March, but just a little preview. But I was thinking, wasn't it interesting for Ali Smith to show both of these main characters as they aged, going through some sort of psychological, either a dream state with Daniel where he's incapacitated, he's not physically able to get up. We never see Daniel in his current contemporary sense ever leave his bed. He is confined to bed. Then we see the mom, who's clearly having some type of psychological trauma. And when you said, oh, it was growing, it was changing shape, it was losing hair, it was a mass, I'm like, oh my God, does she have a brain tumor? Is she having a mini stroke? Is something happening to her? So I was thinking when you brought up the mass and like it's losing its hair and it's growing and it magically goes away when her son shows up. As we age, we need assistance from other people. The son comes to his mother and she's sitting there wearing 3 winter jackets. She has a hat on. The heat is cranked to 80 degrees.
The front door is wide open.
The front door is open. The car door was open with the lights on in the driveway. Something here is not correct. And it was Lux who said, maybe we should call someone. And I had to laugh because Art's like, oh yeah, we'll get a taxi and get the hell out of here because this is cuckoo. And she said, "Be a stupid wanker." I just love that she said that. "Is there someone we can call? You mentioned a sister." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, call my mom's sister." And so I think it was Allie Smith showing us that, like, even though you think you're an independent, wonderful, fully competent human being, there will come a time where you're going to rely on somebody to physically caretake you. Arthur, he's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry I kept you away from your family over Christmas." And she's like, "My family is celebrating in another country," right? She was just very like, "Dude, you don't realize that I'm alone here. I've got nothing. You're it." And I just thought that was really quite interesting. In my mind, the hero of the story does turn out to be Lux because she uses her, what I'm going to call soft power. She wasn't forcing the mom to do anything. She did not confront her, but she's like, "Oh, I think you're too hot. Let me just take your scarf off." And the mom's like, "Oh, okay." And she's like, "Maybe we can just get this jacket off you because it still looks like maybe you'll be more comfortable. Do you want to take your gloves?" And the mom's like, "No." And she's like,
Yeah.
"Okay." And I just love that there was a point in my life who I would have been like, "Listen, I'm in charge here. This is not healthy. Give me your hat. Give me your glove." Like, it's like bulldozing in. And she's like, "Nope." And at the end, the mom says to Arthur, "Lux, she's a good salesperson. She just knows how to meet you where you are. I know where you need to go, but I'm going to let you figure it out for yourself." And I just really, really spectacularly love that. But when you said the ghost story, they literally talk about Dickens. Like Allie Smith's like, "In case you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to talk about Dickens." She also has Lux ask questions about the story and the songs around Christmas. And they're like, "It's not a story, it's Christianity." And she's like, "Well, I'm not a Christian, so for me, it is a story. So please explain the details because I'm a little sparse on those." And then Lux would say, "Oh, isn't it interesting? He was in a manger. They were immigrants, that they were unwelcome, but then there was Halley's Comet." She just brought all of these little ideas together of hospitableness and why the story is told in the way in which it is told. And so I was super charmed with that. The sisters said to each other, like, "I hate you." I said, "Yeah, I hate you too." And then they're like, "Oh, but it's Christmas. So let's watch the things on the television we watched as kids." And then they fell into singing some lyrics of songs that were just harmonious. You could tell it just took them back to their younger, better self. I was really loving that sibling situation because, as we know for Arthur, he's never going to have a sibling. He's a lone little baby floating head. He's just his own one singular thing.
Yeah, I think the reconciliation part that I mentioned in my summary doesn't really tell you that much, but it would be impossible. You just have to read it, and that's the best way to know what it's about. But I really love the reconciliation between Sophia and Iris, and I think I don't know what spring is going to be about. I have a feeling Lux is going to be in it because she disappears like Daniel does, or Sophia disappears from Daniel. Someone disappears, and they have a story.
Joey, you're right. There is like a distance between people who seem to have the capacity for genuine love, connection, and fully encompassing and embracing the awesomeness of each other. And it's like, "Oh, she's gone." I think in my heart of hearts that Lux might die because there was that building that caught on fire at the very end of the novel. And they said there's this big fight over how many people were in there. They don't even want to give a death count because so many people were unhoused and using that place under the radar. Who knows? I hope she comes back. Please don't be dead. And please don't come
Yeah,
back as a ghost.
yeah.
I need her to come
Oh,
back
that'd
as
be
a
interesting.
human person.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
maybe a ghost, that'd be interesting. Lux is so integral to this story for so many reasons. She helps the conversation about immigration, that is very important to this story, but also to the world in general in real life. But she acts like a disruptor in a good way in this story because she is the one that repairs the connections between Art and Sophia and Iris, and allows for the reuniting of Iris and Arthur, who were close when he was very young, and then his mom takes him away when she establishes herself and then sends him off to boarding school. Very Dickens thing to do as well. You were saying one of your favorite parts or scenes of this is the story with Daniel and Sophia, and I agree, especially knowing that it is of Daniel of Autumn. But the part that I love the most, and I think is so tragic, is that Sophia confides the story of Arthur's true father, Daniel, to Lux, and gives her that burden of this truth. Because Lex is like, "So, this feels like a secret, like a big secret for your family. And so what do you want me to do with this? Are you just telling me, or are you wanting me to tell Arthur and break it to him that this man he thought was his father for his entire life is not actually his father?" And Sophia, of course, is like, "No, I don't want you to say anything." And she's like, "That's a lot That's a lot. And so I found myself wondering, like, why did you tell her this? Like, Sophia says herself, I think it's easier just to talk to a stranger about this, but Lux is certainly not the first stranger she's seen since she's had Arthur. So why push this burden onto this woman that you just met?
Yeah, that's a really good question because it is that burdening of someone with your truth that you don't want to share, but you secretly want it shared because if not, you wouldn't have brought it up. Right. It's one of those things like, oh, Joey, I'm going to tell you a deep, dark secret, but don't tell anybody. Okay. And you're like, now I'm carrying your secret. Like, that doesn't seem fair to me. I didn't even have a chance to say, no, thanks. Like, I'm out. I'll just take a pass.
That's a consent issue.
I'm giving you this to you. But I think there was a part of Sophia that knew, based on how smart and perceptive and just kind and together and resourceful Lux was, that this is a person that's going to get me. I don't remember exactly in the book where it happened. They said, tell me the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. So they're sharing these very intimate, revealing about themselves the thing that was most important to me. So I think there was that precedent of openness and transparency and honesty. A lot of people tell me a lot of very interesting things, Joey, I think because I try to make that a safe spot for people to deposit their truth without it going anywhere. But I also think subconsciously, Sophia knew that by telling Lux, somehow Lux, in her gentle power kind of salesman little way, will leave the door open for Arthur to ask his mom. Because at the end of the novel, she says, hey, maybe you should go down in the middle of the night like I did and make some eggs and your mom will come down. He's like, my mom doesn't come down in the middle of the night to eat eggs. And she's like, just try it. Okay. Just see what happens. Maybe you should talk to her about your dad, just leaving that door open. He thinks he's going to talk about, I wanted to say Gilbert Godfrey,
Yeah.
which I know is a contemporary, but that is not his name.
His first name is Godfrey. Yeah.
His real name was Raymond Pond, I think she said. So he even had an alias. So again, that rippling through time and experience of I'm called one thing with one group of people. I have my true sacred name, but people see me in a different way. How do you get identified? Are you still yourself if you use a different name? As you said, we called him Daniel. When he showed up as Dan or Danny, you're like, I don't know who this guy
Yeah. Who
is
is
because
that?
I know Daniel. I always call you Joey. And when your actual name is said to me, I'm like, who? Joey. So it's just a very human response of, I know you in a certain context and putting you outside that context. I'm like, who? The guy you've been talking to every day for a couple of years?
I don't know why anyone referred to me as Joseph, but yeah.
It happens.
I mean, I've certainly been called Joseph. Like I said in the beginning with my initial impressions of this story, it really offers the chance for the reader to contemplate, like, why is she doing that? Because she doesn't ask for permission. I mean, this is different because it's not a sexual context. You do still need consent because Lux knows art. She's literally being employed by him. So, like, it does sort of feel like a betrayal to be like, this guy just spent a whole lot of time explaining his dad to me and seems to have some sense of pride. Like, my father was an actor. He's on his TV shows or films or whatever he was in, theater or whatever, is still circulating on the internet. And he can show it to her and experience these moments, sharing these memories with his father.
Joey, something just popped into my head. You pulled something together for me. Charlotte, the real Charlotte, the girlfriend that we had that he broke up with right before he went to see his mom in Cornwall.
Also, I like Charlotte a lot. I agree.
Love
I
Charlotte.
agree
I
with
want to be
Charlotte.
Charlotte in some ways. She's intuitive and she's smart and she's kind and she knows how to write. And she's also got a vindictive streak when she's crossed, which I can't endorse, but I can relate. What was interesting is that Charlotte, original Charlotte, she was described as a person by Art who knew everything about the character that was his dad. She knew his career, what he sang, what was he doing on Broadway, all the things. And he was like, hey, lady, you actually know more about my dad than I know about my dad, and he's literally my dad. This is kind of weird. And I think he felt a little bit of insecurity about that. So now I'm seeing Allie Smith giving us Lux, who's this beautiful, wonderful woman who now literally knows more about Art's dad than he knows at this point, or might never know. Isn't that an interesting bookend? Like, really?
There's so many things that Allie Smith does that you're like, girl, yes, I love what you're doing here from start to finish. Yeah.
Everything we love.
But I especially love that we get a very tragic love story. She could have went Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet. They could have killed themselves. She does not. We don't have the happily ever after for Daniel or for Sophia, but it's still like a very romantic and very beautiful moment that they share these two interactions in their entire lives. And now that I realize, okay, this is obviously Daniel, they both confirm that this their true love, this was their soulmate. They knew for whatever reason it wasn't going to work out. There seemed to be a very large age gap between Daniel and Sophia. Okay, that doesn't necessarily mean that shouldn't have been the straw that broke the camel's back, but there were other circumstances and just lifestyle choices that kept them apart. But I really like that they acknowledge this is a very satisfying and fulfilling experience for me. I only got to see this person twice, but it was just such a satisfactory experience for me, and I got to experience this sense of true love, and it was fleeting, but I still got to have it, and they never go on. Sophia marries Gottfried, and we know that's obviously lavender marriage, but Daniel doesn't go on to really date. Sophia doesn't end up with anyone either, and so you have to wonder, why didn't you just, like, go with it? We understand that they both knew this would never work out for whatever reason, but I really like that she subverts that idea of to be happy, you have to have a happily ever after and be in a relationship. And
Forever and ever, amen,
yeah.
right? It was like they both said separately, "The love of my life." And as you said, it wasn't just that brief interaction. They carried that seed of love in their hearts until they died, right? Daniel was still telling these stories about, I only loved one person like that. And I just think that was so incredibly well done. And then the other part of me, I don't trust Sophia in some ways because she was jealous of her sister Iris. She's like, "You never raised my kid. My kid never lived with you. Don't you say he's your son." There was just a lot of that possessiveness that it's mine. He is mine. He is not yours. It's like, well, yeah, you loved him so much you sent him to boarding school. And I'm not making any derogatory statements, but that is not my personal experience of parental love. For us, we were keeping it local, right? We did not outsource any of that stuff. We kept it very local. And maybe if she did find Daniel down the way and said, "Oh, by the way, remember that time in Paris? Well, now we have a kid." She's like, "You're a man of the moment. You're a free spirit." He's like, "I am a person who lives the life of the mind." Would she have to give her son up? Would that derail Daniel's life? Do I love you enough not to try to impose this family structure that you didn't ask for? Again, consent, responsibility, all of those questions. Like, was that in her mind? Was she being possessive? And it's like, this is the only thing on earth that will ever be truly mine. And Joy, I want to say one more thing because I know we're almost out of time. What I love that Allie Smith did in that little section at the end talking about Daniel and when they first met and that whole revelation, they met at that house in Cornwall. She bought the house
Hmm.
that she originally met him in. Lux is so funny. She's like, there was a Cornish word um, that named the house, and she's like, what does this phrase mean?" And he's like, "I don't know." She's like, "Oh, isn't that funny that it's the I don't know house?" And he's like, "No, I mean, I literally don't know." And Daniel said something similar. He was like, "Oh, I looked it up. This means the life of the mind." And it's like, of course it does, Allie Smith. You give them the life of the mind. You physically put them in the life of the mind. They only met because they were both physically there. Ah, well, if I was Joy, what would I say? I would say chef's kiss. It was
Yeah.
perfect.
It is a chef's kiss, Allie Smith. Yeah, it's just so well done all together. So I can't wait to read Spring and Summer. I might even just go ahead and read them sooner and not wait. Obviously, I'll reread them because I really want to know. These characters have to continue along, I would assume now, if they're in half of the quartet already. But yeah, it's so tragic that Daniel was definitely ready to be like this great dad. I mean, he was pretty old by the time we meet him in Autumn.
At the end,
Yeah,
yeah,
he's like 80 or something, but he was clearly gonna be a great father. Whether he was ready to do it or not, I don't know. It sounds like maybe not. There's something that usually irks the shit out of me, and it's a miscommunication in a book because they're all miscommunicating with each other until Lux comes is like, "My God, you guys need to just talk to each other. You don't even know your mom's password to her laptop." He's like, "She'll never give it to me." She's like, "Did you ask? Because she gave it to me
like,
right
"Did you
away."
literally say those words out loud?" And he's
Yeah.
like, "Well,
Well,
actually, I
no.
didn't." Yeah, and I love that, Joey, that she's like,
Yeah.
"Words, use them."
Yeah, but usually it really annoys me that characters don't wanna communicate with each other, and that is the thing that will solve it, but I don't think in this case that it actually solves the issue. I think it starts to heal them as a family, but I don't think it's like, "Oh, that's all that was missing. That was the ingredient we needed, and now all of our troubles are solved." And I'll use an example of, I think, an author that couldn't do it the best way for my reading sensibility, and it's actually Sally Rooney, who I love, okay? If anyone has read Beautiful World, Where Are You? A great book. I'd still recommend it. I'm not saying it's a bad book. She obviously does a great job, okay? But in that book, the tension is caused by miscommunication, and in the end, they communicate and everything is solved, okay? And it's very frustrating. That was her purpose, I'm sure. She's obviously very smart, Sally Rooney. But I really appreciate that Ali Smith made it more realistic to me, where it was like, once we start communicating, then we can start to understand each other. But that's a process. It's not, oh, you meant that this whole time and I just never asked you and you never said it. It's like, okay, now we have to understand. And there is still a miscommunication happening because we don't know if Sophia's ever going to tell Arthur about his real father being Daniel. We have no idea. We know that Lux, like you said, suggests like, maybe you should do this and maybe you'll find out something interesting. You never know. Okay. Your mom's got lots of
I didn't
things.
say anything, but I'm just saying ask a question.
Yeah. So
That's
we
all
don't,
I'm
but we
saying.
don't know. So maybe we'll find out in the other one of the other two novels that we have left if that is resolved. But I really appreciate how realistic she went about the idea of miscommunication in a family. Good job.
Ali Smith does such a great job with language about playfulness, about saying, I see you. Art means seeing. Do you see with your eye? Do you see with your iris? Wait, is iris a flower or your sister? You see it in real time in conversations where they are miscommunicating, but they're all communicating completely correctly. There's just different contexts that, unless you know the person's context, you're not going to completely understand it. So I loved that was very clear in the story with Elizabeth and Daniel when he was teaching her words and about how to see and like view art. And then she likes art as in artistic objects, not a human being called art. Then Elizabeth would like teach her mom some of these concepts like, oh, a representation of a representation. She was able to pass that down. What you said about Lux being sort of a healing presence, this person who helps them reconcile just by her presence, by her own openness, her own unattachment to right or wrong or blaming or picking sides. She had zero skin in the game with that. She was on everybody's side. And I really appreciated that because they healed the mother child bond. I think we healed the sisters bond. Some of their thoughts about their past together, like, got a little bit more clear. He also, I believe, forgave Charlotte, the original Charlotte, the
Mhm.
girlfriend who was doing the writing, who took over his Twitter, is now blowing up. She's getting fame. She's living up to her highest potential because she did it out of spite for him. So she's like, oh, you are not being great to me. You want to sleep with another girl, but I am going to blow up your life. And so she found her own success. He writes a reconciliatory letter to her. They reconnect in some way. And now Arthur is contributing to the project he started that she actually blew up into a mega movement that now people are following them. So I just really love that whole idea of sometimes you can grow up and acknowledge that maybe you didn't handle something so great. And maybe that person, although they're not your love interest anymore, they still have a huge value in your life. So, yay, Lux. Thanks for being our hero.
Yeah. Great job, Luck.
We hope you don't die
Yeah.
in an
Hope you
unhoused
don't
prison
die.
fire. Please don't die.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ellie Smith,
It's already written,
do not.
so
It's too late. No notes.
we'll
She's
have
not asking for our notes.
have to do a Stephen King's Misery and be like, "Rewrite her
Yeah.
in. She's not dead."
But she is not dead. We're going to do our own fan fiction. I'm like, oh, by the way, here's the novel that we wrote. Joey, this was really, really spectacular. I really missed kicking off 2026 without you. So this feels like the start of a new year for me. New year, same stuff. So we're about that. And we are going into February. And so here in the United States, where we are both based, it is Black History Month. So I think our focus is going to be exploring various genres of material to talk about the Black literature.
Next month, we're going to be reading some very famous Black authors who are also of fan favorites of ours. We've read them a few times with one new poet that I discovered. So we're going to be reading Slice Him Down by Langston Hughes. Love Langston Hughes. I think this is the third story we've probably talked about Langston Hughes. Then we're going to be reading an essay by Audre Lorde. Again, fan favorite. Love her. Then we're going to be reading a poet that's new to me by the name of Reginald Dwayne Betts, who wrote a poetry collection called Felon, which is great, and I read the whole thing, so I highly recommend it. And then we're gonna end the month of February by reading Burn Down Master's House by Clay Kane, which will come out on January 27th, so I don't even own it yet, but it sounds really good, and I'm excited to read it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joey. We'll see you then. Bye.